it works. We've yet to do enough research on how people lead without power, without authority. And that's important because sometimes we feel as leaders we're powerless. It's all too much. It's the exogenous factors, not the things under my control. I can do it if I had all the levers of control. Leadership without authority and without power is an important thing to study, and we haven't done enough. And I think it's a big challenge. And I think the final challenge is about solutions focus. We tend to look at results, not at solutions. Solutions are not necessarily results. Solutions focus means that we're prepared to ask whole different types of questions and explore whole different types of solutions before we land on the one which is most likely to deliver what we want. So we don't have an array of solutions. We tend to focus on one too soon, too quickly. So I think these are quite complex challenges, but they're quite real ones. How we deal with complexity through adaptive systems, how we deal with power, and how we deal with a solutions focus, as I call it. So my final comment to you, I hope I've not run too long, Denise, is about this general thing about understanding leaders and leadership. And it came to me certainly in my early parts of research last year. Why would you be a leader at all? What? And that's important to answer the question. And it comes down in my analysis, and much of my work, some of you know, is on peace and the development of peace building and conflict resolution. But it's interesting, I looked at different typologies of leadership that I observe in my travels and my research. It's not one size fits all. So why would you be a leader? And there are 5 answers that I've come across. So I'm going to leave you with them. The first is that some leaders just want to be a leader. They just want the position, the recognition, the status. Goes no further. Most of what they'll do forever and a day is hang on to that status and position. So what they do as a leader is stay as a leader. Have a look around. There are lots of leaders and leaderships that work in that way. They just want a position. The second, the more sort of anarchic or revolutionary, is the leadership that says, well, I'm pretty unhappy about the way things are. Global impoverishment, climate challenge, health challenge, financial challenge, unfairness. I want to tear down the way we're doing it now because I have a very clear strategy for the future. And we can see those sorts of leaders as well, whether they're in corporate business organizations or in nation states. Unhappy about things, so let's tear everything down and replace it with this is the solution. Then there's a third kind of leader who's really unhappy about things in the same way. They just want to tear it down because they have this assumption that anything's better than where we are now. Don't have to have a plan, just get rid of all the things that are making it so bad at the moment. Fourthly, another group who are unhappy about now, but they don't want to tear things down. They do want change, and they do have a very clear model of the way they want the change to take place. These are the evolutionists rather than the revolutionists. They're less radical. And fifthly, increasingly, hopefully, my adaptive, deliberative leadership, these are leaders who want change, but they believe the way to change is to help people engage with each other and develop new ways of running things. You don't know exactly what will be the outcome, but you know that the way that you find the outcome is critical. Now, look back at those 5 and look across at your own leadership style, your university's leadership, or leadership of organizations that you observe. The important thing is that not all leadership is the same. So we can't develop leadership in the same way. We have to analyze what it's doing and why it's doing it in the way it does. And don't think that we live in a wonderful world in which we can all go to the 5th type that I've identified. I wish we could. in which leadership was concerned at solving the challenges and crises by working together with broad-based stakeholders, with your professors, with your students, with your cleaners, with your drivers, that they're all part of a process that you need to come together and find a way of developing new ways of running things, because the way we're doing it at the moment is disappointing us. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was brilliant. It was so insightful. And we hope, of course, that we will be able to share your slides with everyone.
Of course, please.
Yes. And people have been furiously making notes, but let me not take up any more time. We have about 10 minutes, colleagues, for any engagement with Mike. It could be in the form of a question. It could be in the form of a comment. And I see Sibi's hand starting to go up there on this side. And then let's alternate between people in the room and people online. So Birgit, if you can monitor who on your side, and I will monitor on my side, but we'll start. Maybe, Mike, if we can just take 2 or 3 comments.
Please take
and you then respond to it that way. So maybe 2 in the room and 1 from the online, because there are more people in the room. Okay, so we'll start with Sibi, will raise hers, and then Angela. Can we make sure that the mics are on, please, Tyron?
Is it working? Okay. I think it's mine are more of a comment or some clarity seeking. I have noted that in all of your presentation, you clearly did not even subscribe or mention any type of leadership that one would find in literature. And I want to assume that the intention was just to give us what a leader could be. So maybe if you were to let us know, do you think of any type of leadership that's found in literature? That's my first question. The second one, you mentioned that a leader should actually concentrate on the context more than global. I'm not sure what that meant. Does it mean that the context is more important than the global, or should one strike a balance to be able to get that? And my last one is, you also mentioned that leaders, they should prosper instead of lead. What does that mean?
Okay, so Sibi was being very clever there. She squeezed in 3 questions into 1. I hope you've managed to take note of that.
Yes, I've got. Yeah.
Get one from Angela. Is yours going to be 1?
It's 1.
Okay, good. And then we'll get one from online, and then we'll have Mike respond. Thank you.
In this scenario where the person is seen as a very good leader, but in the background and in the corridors, there's a lot of bullying that is taking place.
Okay, so a question on bullying.
And then the one is from online.
Yes.
Can I share that? The question is about the followers of bad leaders. What is the psychology behind it? Why are so many people willing to follow bad leaders?
Okay, great. So we've got a good suite of questions for you, Mike.
They're great questions, and thank you very much for your patience. And on types of leadership, I agree, I accept your point. I haven't been prescriptive. I haven't drawn a picture of the sort of leadership I think is right. And it's consistent with my general feeling that this needs to be a thing that emerges from dialogue and from conversation. I have a preference for typology number 5 on my final slide. I do think that a leadership that's based on a negotiated journey is one that's most effective. And if we had more time, we could look at some really powerful examples of that in terms of results. I don't see any difference between context, local context, and global in the way I think. I think we cannot serve the needs of the global challenge and the global agenda unless we are in control and accountable for what happens locally. What we mustn't do, however, is close the borders around our local. What I was trying to say is be confident about here, because then you can contribute to there. And of course, here and there are merged anyway because of the interconnectedness of supply chains, of the global economy and so forth. But I think the behaviors that you establish at home are those that are very powerful when they're taken to other places. And the behaviors at home can only be powerful if they've been influenced and received the lessons from elsewhere. You know, in my career, I was very fortunate. I spent 15 years living in other people's communities in other countries, and I've transformed myself as a result. You live in a Londoner who goes to live in Cairo or goes to live in Jakarta. You know, these are amazing experiences, and I cannot say that my dealing with local things here in London have not been influenced. They have. I'm far from perfect, but my mindset was developed very early on. I don't think that leadership who prospers is necessarily or is looking for successful results. Your third question about being prosperous is a problem. It's, if you go with my identity of types of leadership, if you prosper at other people's expense, then that prosperity is a problem for me, even if you're successful in the measures that you set. And we have to look beyond the immediate benefit, I think. I hope that was a bit clearer. Good leadership and bullying. This is a really, really important question. And thank you for raising it. You know, this, because I talk very fleetingly about the democratic deficit, and it's much more in that statement about the way in which leaders relate to followers, the way in which they are seen to be successful. Now, I'd probably push back and challenge what you mean by good. If I saw or experienced bullying, this is a very negative, coercive relationship between those with authority and those with less, or those with influence or resource and those who are more vulnerable. I would not describe that as an example of good leadership of any kind. What we tend to do is define good as effective. So if good leadership is defined as the leadership that brings results, it brings jobs, it brings prosperity to the nation state, it brings health, fine. But good leadership, in my definition, also has to be ethical. So it has to be effective and it has to be ethical. And I think the use of coercion wouldn't be, in my judgment, an example of good leadership at all. And bullying is a dangerous thing to allow, because when you bully at home, the bully leaves and becomes a bully elsewhere. And if that's part of your human development process, I don't think it works. So I would say any bullying that goes on is a sign of weak and poor leadership that enables it and allows it. And the biggest question of all on followers and why people follow bad leaders. In my terms, bad leaders are those who are unethical and probably not very caring about success for all, quite exclusive. There's a classic one in number 45 in the United States. I call him number 45 because I don't then have to talk about his name, but President number 45 was by many people not a good leader. He closed down the borders around his nation state. He was dreadful in some of the policies that led to an amplification of the health problems, the problems of children from migrant families. There's all sorts of things you could point at, but 74 million people voted for him.
Yeah.
So it's such a good question. And I think it's because followers generally are quite limited in the demands they make of their leaders. And that's why, and it's so good question. That's why when we talk about a leadership development program, we cannot develop a really successful one unless we look at the followers and look at what we're doing. How do we ask our children in the schools, our students in the universities, to hold their leaders to account? Do we talk about that as part of the curriculum? Do we ask them how you help leaders be better leaders? Most of us say, no, they're leaders and we're followers. We just have to be patient until we have control. Whatever. Do you know, I was involved in Bangladesh in a wonderful program some years ago. It was called The Next Generation, the program, Next Generation Leaders. And it was a wonderful program because, as you can begin to capture in that title, it was a program which looked at identifying new young people and giving them leadership skills and mobilizing their spirit and their energy and their enthusiasm. But it was called Next Generation. Okay. And I got to this little village outside Dhaka and we were giving our presentation. And I know I have all the problems of being a white male in this context, and I work really hard at it, but I am who I am. And this young girl, 11 years old, Cinder, her name was, I remember her now. She stood up, bolt upright, put her hand in the air, and she said, Mr. Mike, thank you very much for your work and presentation, but why do you call it the next generation? We're here now. It was a complete revelation to me. I got into touch with trauma. And of course, what it taught me was that it's not for us as leaders to tell our followers to hang on there, be patient, develop your skills, because you can then take over. This notion of next generation. We're all here together. This is this generation. We went back to the hotel that night and we rewrote all the documents. And when the project became called This Generation. And it was my lesson, my introduction to the notion that the investment in followership is as important as any investment in leadership. I hope that clears my question on where I stand on that. But brilliant question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for those really insightful answers and the examples that go with them. I think we don't want to let you go. And we've got somebody following up who's with us. Dr. Beata is following on it at 11:45. Is there room for one more? Has anybody got a burning question that you'd like to ask Mike? Olu and Sandeepa on our side. Anybody on your side,
Yes,
Birgit?
we have one question on accountability. Do you want me to read it out quickly?
Yes, why don't you read that while our
Okay.
people get ready?
So the question is about accountability and leadership, where stakeholders and people are empowered to oversight leadership. So the issue is about growing autocratic leadership and leadership evaluation and accountability. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Olu?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. My question is only one. When I look at what you said about repositioning leaders in leadership, and I reflect on it with another comment from your slide, which says meeting ambition through people's aspiration. What comes to my mind is how do we determine the interface or make a demarcation between micromanaging and abdication of responsibility? Thank you.
Great. Question about the difference, the demarcation, as you put it, between, I'm just repeating it in case those on the other side couldn't hear, between micromanaging and abdicating responsibility. Sandeepa? Sorry, could you use the mic? Otherwise they cannot hear. Our Karina's our runner.
My question also relates to repositioning the leader within leadership. And I'd like advice as to how do you reposition leadership encompassing an appreciation of complexity within leadership that is existing that seems somewhat linear?
Okay, great questions. So Mike, over to you, and we have about 5 minutes left before we let you go. Thank you.
Again, some really, really good questions. And accountability is really hard, you know, and it's, I'm not sure we're well trained or or personally developed in how to hold people to account in an effective and ethical way. So, you know, in our political process, we use the intervals of general elections that we elect people, and then we go to sleep for 3 or 4 years or 5 years until the new election comes around, and we can hold people to account by events, by elections, rather than continuous. So part of the issue for me is, how do we develop systems of continuous assessment, as we do with students? We don't just examine students once a year as we used to. We do it on a continuous basis, because we understand that accountability and holding people to account is a way we can help them improve. And it's about development, you know, about development, not just about performance. But it's hard. And I think what the leader has to do is to embrace a process or acceptance of being continuously reviewed rather than periodically reviewed. And it's very challenging, very difficult. And leaders will look across at other leaders and say, well, they're not doing it, so why would I make this really complex decision? But for me, the results, the benefits are huge, in that you have much greater diversity of viewpoints, much greater richness of ideas and incentives. Look at where some of the tech companies developed out of Silicon Valley, the Googles of this world. You know, they have many problems with their corporate performance but if you look at the way in which they work internally, flat structures, you know, no offices, they sit on bean bags, they drink Coke. And so, you know, the general transformation in the way in which they led their innovation from the traditional scientific management of the 60s and 70s was remarkable. And it's encouraged us all to think again about the way. And it does relate. If you take my leadership style, I do try and walk the talk. In my center, I never chaired meetings. I was director, but always someone else would chair the meetings, because I wanted to be a participant and I wanted to set that challenge. And in student seminars, you know, I'd get students to lead rather than staff. And there's all sorts of ways you can do. And it's generally about being open to accountability. You'll have much better ideas than those couple that I've shared. And on the issue of aspirations and ambitions, what a good question. You know, we do actually work to fulfill our ambitions as educators through the aspirations and motivations of our students and our co-researchers. We measure the university's success, its league tables, by their performance. We expect them to be motivated and driven in order to achieve our institutional success. That's quite an interesting thought. And I want us to mobilize that thinking, not simply just tick it off and say, okay. But I think we should be setting our ambitions by their aspirations more directly. So if you have an aspirant young people who want to learn, that want to challenge, that want to be part of decision making, then we should think seriously about enabling that and not creating glass ceilings between students and educators. It's really challenging, but you can see the sense and the logic in the thinking, and it needs exploring, it needs discussion. So in my center, we had 2 committee structures, one which the university required, which was accountable leaders and managers. And we had one which was inspired from bottom up. We had a top down and a bottom up. And because I couldn't get the university to transform their top down structures, we had to run them in parallel. And which was the most effective in terms of changing our policy? It's an interesting observation. They worked in hand in glove very well together. And you'll find a question on repositioning leaders. This is really a mantra I have at the moment, repositioning leaders within leadership. And thank you for asking it. It wasn't just an aside. It's a really important point that I'm trying to explore at the moment. Can a leader be someone who's a facilitator, who's a coach, who's a mentor, who's an enabler, rather than who's Ms. or Mr. Big, who makes all the decisions, who decides on everything ultimately? You've got an issue of accountability. So you have to hold your leaders. Ultimately, there has to be somewhere that makes the difference and the change. But can we reposition the leaders so that at leadership courses, it's not the leaders that go, but it's the people who support the leaders? That's a repositioning. That when the vice chancellor at my university holds my center to account, instead of calling me to the head table to explain what we're doing, why doesn't he come down and talk to others? There's a whole different ways of, and it's Mike who's enabling this to happen, not making it happen, not responsible for everything that's going on, but is setting the values, the culture, and the way of working. So repositioning leaders very subtly is really important. Leaders cannot be effective and ethical if they work on their own. And if it's about them, it's not. It's about the way in which their team performs and how they, as leadership, are a team facilitator. So what do you need to be a leader? Not clarity, decisiveness, not charisma, not good public speaking. It's your ability to relate to people and to bring out the best in them. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for inviting me, Denise. It's been a good luck with your program.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think this has been fantastic, and a big round of applause from all of us. And we do hope that we'll be able to engage with you more as we continue with this program and other events that arise and emerge out of it, because already we see the seeds of many additional things coming out of this program. So thank you so much, Mike. It's been a real joy to be in communication with you, and thank you for your thorough preparation.
I do apologize if it's so difficult being digitally separated. So next time we should be together. And I apologize if you can't hear or I speak too quickly or the visuals weren't good. That's the life we lead.
It was perfect.
Thank you very much.
Somebody's giving me. Mike, there are people wanting to know if they may be able to email you. And as we have said to the group here, you are quite within your boundaries to be able to say, not at this time, I'm too engaged with other things. Maybe we can take this offline and I will respond so that we don't put you on the spot.
I'm very happy for that to your members. If they want, you have my email address, that's fine.
Okay, thank you again for your presentation. And now we're going to give everybody a stretch break. We literally mean 5 minutes, everyone. Stretch break, bathroom break, and Beata, we'll give you the time to set up your presentation. So thank you, everybody. Please stretch your legs, grab some water.
Mike.
Bye, Mike.
Speak soon. Yeah, bye.
That was so excellent.
It was lovely. Fantastic. Nelly, did he answer your
I think Olu, Baba, between the micromanaging and the abdicating, that didn't come out as clearly, but those are certainly discussions we can continue to have, amongst ourselves, because it's a polarity, I struggle with it a lot.
Yeah. He really answered me. He answered me very well, to a point that I just went on Google to search on him so that I can follow, because I realized, I can learn from this person, and mostly more speaking to some of my conceived ideas and things that I've been implementing in my space of leadership, just to allow people to have power in the office, to a point that they become a checklist. They feel like they own the department, not like it's me who is in control or owning them and so forth. But I don't seem to be finding this growing and being encouraged or nurtured as we move on. And more finding like appointments into leadership are more like political appointments. And at times they kind of like take the political shape and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, I've been answered. It's very good.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm just trying to connect. Oh, there is Beata. Beata, can you speak a little bit? Let me see if it echoes.
I hope it doesn't.
It doesn't. It's perfect. I got it because I can see you on the one and I hear you speaking on the other. Perfect. That's great. Beata, can you my best friend at school was called Beata. Such a nice name. I got such a lovely name. So Beata, can you share your screen for so I can see if that works?
Sure.
Have you got a presentation?
Yes. So it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, wait, I'm going to make you host. Okay, I didn't do it on both. Let me see now. Are you now co-host?
Okay. I'm just going to close a few of the open programs here because it's picking up the ones that. Let me see now. Yep. How's that?
I can see you. Perfect. So what we're going to do, Beata, is we're going to I'll introduce Denise will start us off. Then I'll introduce you and read your bio, and then you will do your presentation, and we'll go through, and Denise will manage us from there forward.
Okay, cool. So should I just leave it on like that?
I think it's nice like this. That works. And then later on, I've changed the view on the screen. I'll make it speaker view, so just you and your screen are visible. At the moment, it's all of us. Okay.
Okay, but I'm going to request that I switch off the video during the presentation just to strengthen the connectivity.
Okay.
Because otherwise, it keeps freezing the speech if the video is on. Would that be all right?
That's fine. I'm sure that's fine. That's good.
Okay.
We live with this, I mean, I think it's this online environment. I mean, we live with these things just how it is, there's nothing we can do. No, that's all good. Thank you. Lovely meeting you.
Cool. A pleasure indeed. Yeah. I felt like, I should have been there. Why am I not there?
Oh, it was lovely. I mean, Mike speaks about the idea, that the more we live in pluralist societies and diverse societies, the harder it is to use our old systems, because the old systems, of course, are built in homogenous societies, so the old ways of knowing are for all of us, Anyway, so he's just lovely.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay,
so we've got 5 minutes. So I'm just going to take myself off the camera for a minute.
Okay.
Hi, Beata, brightness this side.
Hi, how are you?
And in yourself.
Why do you sound so soft? Are you tired already?
No, not really. I'm just internalizing what I've just been listening to.
You me so interesting. So interesting. Yeah.
I came and the again.
Okay, dear. Sure. Okay, I'm going to email you my slides so that you can screen them from your end. Will that do?
That will be great. So if you can send them to Birgit, please, Beata, because she's the host. Have you got Birgit's address?
Yes, I've already just sent.
Okay, great stuff. So Birgit will load your slides from her.
Denise,
Can you?
okay, I'm going to try. I'll tell you why I can't, because I'm recording. I'll tell you, no, this is so interesting. I tried a minute ago with Mike to do the same. And when I try and minimize my screen to get the slideshow up, my recording stops and I can't record. So I can either move slides or record. I can't do both.
Okay, so Tyron, can you help us? Give Tyron control, co-host, and send the slides to him, please. Sorry, everyone. He has to be host.
He has to be host. No, he can be her co-host and he can share slides from being a co-host. I'll send him the slides.
Okay, let's see. Otherwise, if in the next couple of minutes we don't get this right, we will listen carefully, Beata. Very
No,
carefully
no,
what
no.
you say, and see the slides later.
We've
Because we
got
know
to see
you're
the
doing this in the
slides.
middle of other things going on.
Hold on. I'm going to send it forward. I'm going to send it to Denise and what's his name? It sounds
Tyron, but care of to the mark to the
Mark
sound station.
Mark at Sound Station.
Sound station.
Is it
Not
Mark?
station?
Mark
Sound
at
station at MWeb. Sound station at MWeb.
Mark at Sound Station. Okay. See if it works. It should be on Mark's desk. This is what's called working in the international space, you know. So this is, you know, this is crazy. At least, you know, the one good thing, at least we're doing all of this during daytime and some civilized time. I've done all of this at 4 a.m. to accommodate some beans and yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
Okay. Have you received it, Tyron? Not yet. I've given her that. Have you sent it to Sound Station, Birgit, not to Mark?
Yeah.
I've put his address in the chat.
It's also an option to send the slides to everybody.
Ah.
Yes, that's another option.
Interesting option. Hold on.
But now you need everybody's address.
I've
So
got
you'll
it.
have to send it to me. Or send it to Birgit and she can distribute. This is taking a while. Don't stress, Beata. We'll get it sorted.
Okay. I'm trying again to share, and I just want to see if the slides will move.
Okay. Yes, we see it. Now we have to get it moving. Cover slide. Well done. We've got it up.
Perfect. Yes.
Great.
Thanks everybody for your patience.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks,
So
Beata. Thank
sorry,
you,
so sorry
Deidre.
about that, everyone. Anyway, as I was saying, the key drivers for internationalization, I mentioned the strategy, the aspect of resources, staffing, institutional thrust, and I got interrupted when I was talking about the aspect of operations, systems, and diplomacy. So my presentation is going to revolve around these three aspects because I find that there is value in looking at them holistically, and they speak to a variety of things that are important for implementing internationalization. So I start with strategy, and I'm saying one needs to have a thought through strategy that directly speaks to the priorities of the institution. This is important because you need to have the buy-in of all internal stakeholders, and the strategy must be produced as a result of a consultative process that takes into consideration the interest of the internal stakeholders. I've found that this is one of the key aspects that enable the success implementation of the strategy. Because in other spaces, you find that the development of the strategy, the implementation of the strategy is left to the directors of international offices without the participation of those key stakeholders that are actually drivers of internationalization in the university. I find this also very useful in the sense that the times have changed and the nature of change is such that internationalization is no longer a nice to have as it was in the past. That in fact, it is an institutional imperative. So one needs to make sure that the strategy locates internationalization directly within the vision and mission of the university. This is also to enable the strategy or internationalization initiatives to stand as an important pillar to support institutional objectives. This then means one needs to set realistic, achievable, and measurable strategic objectives. I've seen in other places where you have a really beautiful strategy, but over the next 5 years, you've only achieved 2 or 3 objectives, because part of the strategy speaks to really good ideas, but that are not realistic and that don't take the challenges on the ground into account. And one of those key challenges is actually having a resource mobilization plan. Without this, I've seen a lot of good ideas fail. Without a financial plan that will oversee how the strategy is going to be implemented, it's going to be difficult. Internationalization is a very costly exercise. So there has to be a resource allocation, but also a resource mobilization plan that will see a revenue generation plan for the university as one of the outcomes of internationalization. I've also identified a proper global footprint plan. Often, international offices have a tongue-in-cheek sort of way labeled travel agencies, because you find that the one thing that is happening the most is travel, and most directors would actually be absent for the whole year and moving from one part of the world to another under the name networking. And I've seen some of these ways actually a gathering of international office practitioners, and it can be very costly if it's not attached to a specific plan in which the university wants to see itself. It can also be a waste of time, because traveling is part of the plan, but it has to be planned and it has to speak to what the university needs by way of profiling itself and making itself visible to different parts of the globe. So I want to talk about resources, because resources constitute a very important bit in internationalization. As I had said earlier, it's a very expensive affair. And what makes it particularly expensive is that responsibility is often left to the university to fend for itself in terms of making money available for the initiatives that the university has already identified as key. There is no coordinated national effort to support internationalization. And there are three critical spaces at national level that should be engaging in this activity. In fact, at some point, I've even spoken of USAF playing a critical role in this case. You've got DECO that is responsible for the international relationships of the country, and which is able to open up spaces, opportunities, and areas within which we could advance our interest as universities. But there's no connection between DECO and any of the universities. There's the Department of Higher Education and Training, which has an international relations office that serves DECO, but does not serve universities, in a sense that the way the department is structured, you have a universities branch that only deals with universities, but there is no talk between the universities branch and the international relations branch in the Department of Higher Education and Training, so that these two could be able to assist universities on the ground. You do have AISA, which is supposed to be a platform for advancing the interest of universities, assisting universities' internationalization initiatives, but even this is not working very well. In my view, is that the successes of AISA are prevented by your old boys club, which continues to run the show, which continues to decide what happens and what doesn't happen without necessarily looking at what are the critical issues that affect the sector and how there could be a sort of coordinated approach that would be taken to bigger structures like USAF, like government, especially because government has interdepartmental meetings where you can get all the representatives of government. DECO hosts this all the time. And sometimes DECO would host the NRF to look at what sort of research areas the country wants to support. But I don't see that speaking to internationalization proper. There would be some funding envelopes available within the NRF, but these are not dedicated in a way that can advance internationalization initiatives of the university, save for the individualized international exposure of academics and researchers. So for me, I think this is an important space that one needs to start looking at to correct some of the wrongs in the country. But within the university or universities, I've identified the aspect of human resources, the aspect of profiling the university globally, and the aspect of programs that you want to I know Denise in the past has cautioned me about using the word sell or commodify, or but these are the offerings that the university would want to have to your international students. So to talk about the aspect of human resources, I find that often you would have a good idea, you have a good strategy, you'd have good buy-in, but then it stops there. And in the past, international offices would get by with just 4, 3, 6 at most staff members. But I've seen in other spaces that successful internationalization initiatives actually start with having adequate staffing. At UCT, for example, I had over 40 staff members. It's the same at Stellenbosch. You have over, 45 staff members. But one would come and say, yeah, but these are rich universities. Universities like Nelson Mandela wouldn't have those kind of resources. Then, well, you look at UJ, which is also a comprehensive university, and which wasn't at the position that it is now 10 years ago. And that one of the structural changes that were made to enable internationalization to thrive to a point at which it is now is the aspect of staffing in internationalization. At UJ, you've got very senior people heading the different units. In fact, each unit is headed by a director, reporting to a senior director. Even the issue of semester study abroad initiatives is run by a specific director. And so there has to be an understanding within the university that the times are changing and the times are such that they require skills that will enable the plan and the strategy to be implemented as effectively as possible. Today, positions are starting to call for PhDs, for master's graduates, and these are taking over your standard M+2s that used to occupy these offices. The second aspect that I identify is that of profiling and visibility, which has now required thinking around aspects of digitization, the fourth industrial revolution, its implications for virtual learning. So you cannot be expecting the same old M+2s who were doing their work business as usual for the last 15 years to all of a sudden have a greater understanding of what the digitization space means and how that impacts on their work. Today, you need a combination of high tech and skills. You don't want the same thing that has happened a few minutes ago to impinge on the success stories that you want to share or the drive of programs that you want to have. You need people who understand the university's academic project, but also who have a proper orientation of the aspect of service excellence that needs to drive the implementation of internationalization. I mean, social media platforms today are no longer a pastime for young people, but are very important tools for increasing the visibility of the university. I spent time in China. I actually attended a training program for setting up a Confucius Institute in China. And I remember engaging with some of the Chinese, and they would ask, where are you from? No, I'm from South Africa. Where? No, I'm from Cape Town. Oh, you're from Stellenbosch. No, I'm from the University of Cape Town. Yeah, we know. Stellenbosch universities. No, Stellenbosch University and University of Cape Town are two different universities. Yeah. They wouldn't know the University of Cape Town, even though we at the time when I was part of the UCT, we prided ourselves for being part of the top universities in the continent. And here you are in mainland China, they don't know what UCT is, but they only know Stellenbosch. What does that mean? That it's about the profiling strategies that are used, the way in which the university is made to be visible in the spaces that you have identified as critical for you to be visible within. And this is quite interesting because both Stellenbosch and UCT have Confucius Institutes, but Stellenbosch seems to have more prominence than UCT. So I also speak about academic oriented programs. So my experience at UCT was that many of the programs that informed internationalization were very much about, delivering these programs to the rich northern students who want to come to South Africa for edutourism. They want to surf the ocean. They want to have fun. They want to party all the time. And you have to ask yourself, what is the scholarship in this? What is the scholarly aspect that you want to convey in your programs by way of short learning programs, your study abroad programs, the language programs that you would want to have for those students that do not speak English, or for your partners that do not have English as a first language. But also for your full degree programs, how interesting are your full degree programs so that they are able to attract the best students across the world, but also the best staff. You can't be offering a typewriting program university, nobody wants to learn about typewriting. But you've got to be able to think about the programs that you want to offer an international community that are relevant to today's issues, that are interesting, that are catchy, but also that speaks about your country. Because I found that some of the students I received at one point at UCT, African-American students who were a little bit despondent because they felt many of the issues were not speaking to them as African-Americans, as young women. So those are some of the things that only as a concerted effort of the university can this be done and not be left to the directors of international offices. So I come again to the issue of staffing, because for me it's very important. And I'm saying if it means there has to be a restructuring of the international office, then so be it. And I mean, I was listening again in the previous presentation about leadership that identifies the problem in the now but doesn't want to change anything. I suppose what I'm saying is that you have to go and change that bit. If the staffing is not ready to provide these interesting, catchy programs that I speak about, because they are very important third stream or revenue generating programs. And they then need people who have this understanding. Again, I spoke about high-end technological skills, but you need to add the issue of diplomacy here. You need people who have a good understanding of the immigration laws of the world. You've got people who understand the local realities and shift in geopolitics so that they can inform the initiatives and the strategies that are in place. I talk a lot about service excellence and the professionalization of administrative functions, which were previously really disregarded as, that's admin. You'd find many academics, when you try to work with certain academics and certain projects, like, oh, but I don't want to do admin. You try to rope some people into some very important initiatives. I don't want to do admin. But actually, what we understood administration and what admin means has changed significantly. And I tongue in cheek again, speak about the Toyotization of administration functions. In fact, I decided here's a reminder of a just in time. If you look at this just in time, the Japanese model of service excellence, all of these blocks speaks to the things that we want to have in our space if we want to successfully implement internationalization. You can talk about waste elimination. I've seen a lot of waste in certain spaces, and I mentioned travel as one of the few, if it's not part of a properly thought through plan. And uninterrupted workflows. I've started putting together workflows of each and everything that the international office is responsible for, so that the rest of the university members can understand how do you put together an international partnership. And there is an appreciation of how difficult or how time consuming these processes take, so that when there is a little bit of delay, there is an understanding why those delays are necessary. The Japanese talk about customer delight. I talk about, student delight, researchers delight, academic delight, and all members of the university who would be delighted at the nature of the service that gets provided by the international office. Obviously, the aspect of employee involvement, and I spoke about the buy-in of top management, as well as long-term sustainable relationships that we try to build in internationalization, but also top quality control. And I'll speak a little bit about what it means in internationalization. But hey, look, here, this is 20th century, 19th, 20th century, it's still relevant in the 21st century. Some of these are really good ideas that we can, put into our plans, and you have your 21st century idea of Toyotization or GIT, as it were. So the second pillar that I spoke about was in having an institutional strategic thrust. What this is about for me is the extent to which the university embraces internationalization as one of its core responsibilities. So I talk about mainstreaming internationalization, and here really the idea is that being a member of international networks, participating in multilateral structures, and being involved in global initiatives, for example, to address social skills, such as the work of the SDGs and the African Agenda 2063, FOCAC initiatives, and what is now coming to an end in terms of the Beijing Action Plan. All of these things should be standard initiatives that international offices or members of the university are participating in. And so mainstreaming internationalization should make these things so regular so that they are part of the deliverables of your year in and year out. But for this to happen, you need internal stakeholder buy-in. And I've found, and again, this is also my experience at Mandela, it was the same at UCT, it was the same in the Free State, and I think it's actually the same in other spaces, where you have those trailblazer academics or research entities who will tell you, look, I've been doing this, for the last 15 years. How is this new strategy going to change what I'm doing? Actually, it's been working perfectly. I don't need any of these additional layers of institutionalizing and administrative layers that are just going to complicate my life. So it's very important, and from a leadership point of view, that there is a degree of buy-in from those that the internationalization strategy is going to serve. As I said earlier, it has to be one of the core functions of the institution, and in such a way that there is even provision for earmarked funding that is going to see some of the institution-wide initiatives that will be supported, and there will be institution-wide monitoring and evaluation mechanisms that will see, how successful are we implementing the strategy? What are the challenges? What are the weaknesses? And what are we doing well? And within that, you built in an internal incentive system. I've seen some universities are now starting to put together an internationalization report. If you remember in the past, or the standard idea was to have a research report, and internationalization initiatives would be part of the research report. But I've seen now actually UJ also has a standard internationalization report, which begins to show the different areas of strength that the university has managed to put for themselves. I also added here the aspect of engaging internationalization, of having engaging internationalization at home initiatives. These speak to your community engagement, and this is really, and the Mandela University is really big on this, where you ask yourself as a university, how can we be of service to the communities within which the university is located? But also, how can we be of service to the province within which our university is located? How can we work together with the other universities in the province? How can we contribute to the national initiatives, such as, for example, your national efforts at development, that are currently in place, and that is inspired by the idea of weaving into the plan of internationalization real community engagement programs. I've also found that when you talk about mobility initiatives, it's often about those who have the money, but there are those who also don't have the money, who are just as deserving of having this international exposure. And if the university does not put together a funding initiative or system in place in which the outbound student mobility and staff mobility is going to be centrally driven, because for staff mobility, some of the research development programs require this international exposure. I've also added here the systems integration and internal collaborations. I've found that where I speak, for example, to a particular partner about an initiative, they would say to me, well, I'm already working with so-and-so in Department X or in Entity X. And you find that there's 4 spaces in the university that are interacting with one partner. Already that partner can see that there's no coordination in the university. And systems integration is therefore speaking to rectifying and remedying that and ensuring that there's broader internal collaborations around critical areas of internationalization. This is my favorite part because it allows so much room for development. I've found that in many universities, despite the transformation that is currently taking place across the sector, there are various systems, processes, regulatory mechanisms that remain in place. And there is no considered effort to start looking at what are those policies that we've had in the past, and how do these policies become enablers of the things that we want to achieve today. For example, some universities don't have an internationalization policy. They might have a strategy, but there's no policy driving the strategy. Some universities don't have an actual contracts or international agreements policy. There is no joint degree policy, despite the fact that the Department of Higher Education and Training has already produced guidelines in the internationalization framework that allows us now to start thriving. And these things you find they're done haphazardly in different spaces, and there's no uniform approach. And here's an interesting one for me. You find that there's a greater neglect on the issues of admission policies for international students. And this takes into account the protocols that are detailed in the SADC protocol, that are constituted in partnership exchange programs, the running of internship programs, the hosting of graduate scholars in the university. There's no policy governing any of these things. It's just happening haphazardly, and until there is a problem and you start scratching around to see how you can deal with the problem. I found that the processing of student application, admissions, registration, issues of orientation, and student integration are also not coordinated. Often it is the business of the international office, but in fact, this should be the business of the registrar in the main, of student affairs, of faculties, and this done collaboratively. Otherwise, some of the challenges I've seen, you discover a staff member has been sitting with 3 boxes of applications of international students because of their own orientation of this and that. And faculties are complaining that the numbers are not adding, they're not growing, and there's a shortage of postgraduate students across the sector, especially of international students. Sorry. And the other area that I've identified is that of having stable and standardized processes. This, for me, I've found to be particularly important when it comes to concluding institutional agreements, international agreements. And often you find that South African universities tend to react or be reactive in nature. And there's hardly a proactive approach into initiating agreements. So you end up with a university sitting with a bunch of agreements that the identity, the format, the brand of a partnering institution, and downplaying the role of your own institution. This is also another case when it comes to joint degree offering and certification. There are some partners abroad who know which universities to go for because they know they're going to have very little resistance when it comes to them accepting what they want or how they want the joint degree offering and the issuing of the certification to be. If these things are not thought through, you end up really being in service of the partnering institution rather than your own institution and the country, as it were. I've also found that if there are no, as I said earlier, dedicated process flows with regards to how you implement your semester study abroad, your international partnership agreements, as I said, but also your out. Have to start very closely to the accounting and finance management systems that you want to attach to the international office. Because if you want to have a good program, if you want to have a good program, you want to have a good financing or resource mobilization plan, it has to be accompanied by a good accounting and finance management idea. My last point, really, is the issue of diplomacy, which is also critical, and it goes back to the issue of the human resource skills that I talked about. It's important to know when to walk away in negotiations. Not every partnership is a good idea. Not every international partnership is a good idea. When you start getting into negotiations, it's not for you to push the international office to get the agreement in place, to get that relationship going, because there's a lot of negotiations that go on so that you weigh the benefits against the possible risks of an existing or a new partnership. I've also found that there is a need to start reviewing existing agreements, many of which were concluded many years ago. And some of the areas of agreement are no longer, have become redundant and are no longer part of where the university is going. But you keep renewing it, you keep renewing it because it's a good idea, it's a good relationship, it's been going for many years, but the terms of agreement remain the same and do not speak to the institutional imperatives. Renegotiating terms upon renewal is also important. The minute the agreement comes to an end, you want to immediately initiate a process of negotiating the new terms. The world has changed so much. Our position as a country, as a continent, has changed so much. The things we were able to do 5 years ago, we are no longer able to do. We've had to reallocate resources to prioritize a whole range of things. It's also equally important to start thinking about how to renegotiate the terms of the relationship in which you had put yourself about 5 or 10 years ago. Of course, we want to keep partners engaged, and most importantly, we want to ensure that we are visible to those we consider our funders, our sponsors, and our donors. So these are my ideas. Really, they are ideas that I am able to share with you today, and I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Oh, thank you so much, Beata. It's just was so dense and there was so much in it. Thank you. That was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So it's my privilege to see if there are questions. I'm going to ask Denise to see if there are any from the floor in your group. I can see there's one on our side.
We've got one hand up, and I did notice some in your chat room. We've got 2 hands up. So can we take those 2 contributions from our side and then from your side as a first round? We have about 10 minutes or so, everyone, because we've told Doc that she will be on until 1:45. I'm not sure if she has a few more minutes, but let's go. Sebi, are you
I
ready?
do.
Okay, so Sebi will start us off. Unless
I can share one.
Yeah, I'm on. Just one question. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's quite thought-provoking. Is there a standard template for those MOUs or for those negotiations that one has to enter when having joint degrees? If there are, would love to have you share them with us.
Thank you. Did you all hear on our side? Okay, great. Thanks. On our side, in the room, we have. Go ahead. Sebi, you're not going to ask your question anymore? Did you ask it
Yeah,
already?
she did. Yes, she said it.
Oh,
I'm going to add one, but after I'm going
I
to,
clearly need a break. Go ahead, Angela.
Um,
I
Thank you.
heard the voice, but I wasn't sure
Yeah.
it was yours.
Thank you so much, because within the sector of community engagement, I drive this particular sector very much so. And we have lots of MOU signed with Erasmus and a number of different countries in the Eastern Bloc as well. And the thing that really is so important is the collaboration that one has to work with the international office. So it is about the academic driving the international office. Just last night, I had to say, what happened to the contract with Moi University in Kenya? It shouldn't be me, you know, it should be somebody else who's doing that. But I think if we want to grow this, and really, if we're looking at third stream income for a university, there's it. It's right in our faces. Thank you.
Thank you. So those are the two in our room.
thank you. I'm going to add a third one. Beata, the question is about how can an international office with view towards internationalization on the one hand and globalization, how can an international office that contribute to the advancement of gender transformation? And then there is the fourth question I want to add, perhaps you can bring that in. What are the major challenges around international joint programs? What would you recommend?
So can you repeat the last question?
The last one is about offering joint programs with international partners, international universities. What are the perhaps major challenges that you experience, and how do you resolve these perhaps?
So can I respond to the set of questions now?
Thank
Yes,
you.
please go ahead.
Okay, so sorry, the Department of Higher Education and Training actually does give you a guideline on how to conclude an international agreement in terms of the template. But it's not imposed on institutions. It's to say these are the aspects that must be in place for a good international agreement to facilitate the relationship. But that needs to be taken into the institution, and it needs to be looked at by key internal stakeholders of, do we agree, do we want to have this section, do we want it to speak to this section? And so this is a process that I've actually had to do in all universities, because I found, and all universities I've worked at on internationalization, because I've found that was one area that was neglected, where you need to first look at what the DHET provides by way of guideline. I've also tended to also, because sorry, DECO has a very good booklet on concluding international agreements. So I've also tended to look into that, but also looking at what the university is about, what the institution desires. And those three spaces, you need to put them together, because you need to own the format. It has to speak to your own needs as an institution. But the template, it's available. You can go on the DHET website. The internationalization framework is easily available. You can just Google it and it will just pop up. It's actually easily accessible. The issue of, goodness, I want to take the issue of gender transformation. Because it's one of the aspects that I am really passionate about. International officers, as I said, were a playground for the old boys, your blue-eyed boys. And over time, when women, especially women of color, start coming in, they've always retained that clique of this. We own internationalization. We know what we are doing. You just follow. and you do what we're doing. So much so that, and I mean, this is not me speaking out of 10 about AISA, but it is a critical space that needs to be strengthened, and which I believe USAF must begin to open a little bit of room for engaging with AISA, because it's such an important space. But it is not speaking to the issues that are very close to us as international or internationalization practitioners, or issues that are close to universities generally. And so as a result of this, there's no, because the issue of gender transformation, Nelson Mandela University is huge. A lot of investments in scholarship and research, and even in financial support of programs. But it shouldn't be a Nelson Mandela initiative. It should be done at a national level, and structures like AISA then become very important to taking some of these things forward. I'm even tempted to call on the issue of bullying that was asked earlier on, because you find that people are afraid to speak up. At one point, I raised 2 or 3 issues that were absolutely crucial with regards to ensuring that there is a national thinking around internationalization. But it was such a charged sort of talk, and people started being afraid, and nobody wanted to talk. And the host actually shut me down to say, well, Beata, we're not going to talk about that right now. This is not a space about gender issues. So already that gives you a sense, of okay, this is our space, and we're going to bully you out of the space. And so for me, I think the structures that we have need to be strengthened to understand that the issue of gender studies, gender transformation, just the sheer thinking around gender equality, and which is, I always say, it's such a big drive towards the eradication of GBV that we talk about. And so it cannot be just an institutional initiative. And the issue of international offering of joint programs. There's a lot of administration that is involved. There's a lot of back and forth when you negotiate a joint degree, particularly because the universities in the North, and by North, I mean your North America, your Europe, and to a very surprising extent, your Western Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. They want double degrees, and our guidelines do not allow us to have double degrees. We can only do joint degrees. And so you find that you have a good idea from a scholarship point of view. The ideas are fantastic. The programs have been thought through and they're interesting. The students are there and money is there. But how do you, what will it mean at the end of the day? And I, in my experience, have deadlocked a lot on when you now have to come up with the actual certificate. What will it look like? Because obviously, if you don't have an institutional template, you're always going to be negotiating with a partner every time you have a joint degree that you are negotiating. I've also found that the aspect of fee waiver, that is an integral component of joint degrees, is a big problem for universities, developing universities, certainly South African universities, because we need the fee and we need the subsidy. And Northern partners would want to come and have their students' fee waived, which for them is more expensive. But the same is not true for when our students are going that side. You find that the waiving of fees actually abroad is a small cost compared to what it costs to have a student overseas, from accommodation to local ground transportation to food and all of those things. So negotiating these very minute aspects becomes very tricky. But at Nelson Mandela, we've been able to successfully complete this. I mean, the French partners, for example, can be particularly tricky because they want to do things their own way and nothing else. So you have to be firm. And I've said at one occasion, well, this is a deal breaker.